take unless you get from up here.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Okay. All right. Second o'clock, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a joint board meeting for the town of Ladoga and Clark Township. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and David, you will lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tom, will you lead us in prayer?
All right, you all can remain seated, just remove your hats, and we'll say a quick prayer, and we'll start in on the meeting. Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to be able to come in here and just talk about new and exciting things for the town of Ladoga and the fire department and the new fire territory. We just ask for your wisdom as we step through this, as this is new to us, and we lean on the wiser people that are here to explain this to us, that we understand it, and we always hold what's best for our citizens at heart. And we ask these things in your son's name, amen.
Okay, minutes approval. Everybody's been provided a copy of the minutes from the January 12th meeting. I would entertain two motions, one from the town of Ladoga on approval.
Okay, pertaining to ordinance, what?
No, minutes.
Oh, minutes. Yep, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Sorry.
I'll second that. Okay, for Clark Township, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from January 12th.
I'll make a motion to approve them. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, introduction, roll call, town of Ladoga, if you want to introduce?
I'm Amy Holiday, first treasurer for the town of Ladoga. This is Ron Brown, our council president, or vice president, excuse me, and Tricia Garcia, council member, and Chairwoman is deputy clerk, April Bradley.
Clark Township, I'm Amy Keating, I'm the trustee, I'm gonna let my board introduce themselves.
David Orwig, President Advisory Board, Clark Township.
Calvin Gilbert, Vice President, Clark Township.
Lee Malone, Secretary, Clark Township.
Okay, I'd also like anyone from the fire department that's here to introduce themselves, or the chief can introduce them, whatever you'd like.
Reggie Perry, Fire Chief.
Rory Perry, Assistant Chief.
Scott Lowe, Assistant Chief.
Cody Wood, firefighter. Roger Perry, firefighter.
Dave Perry, firefighter.
Thank you. And then our professional advisors.
I'm Susan Callan with Baker Tilly, financial advisor.
Name's Dan Shackle. I'm an attorney with FBT Gibbons.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're gonna go ahead and open the public hearing for both Clark Township and Ladoga in regards to the fire territory. We'll start off with a presentation. On behalf, the town and the township asked me to speak on both of their behalfs. Thank you everyone for attending the public hearing tonight. The purpose of this hearing is to provide information to the public as to why a fire territory is being proposed and for public comments to be heard by both the town and the township officials. This is the first of 3 required hearings with an adoption meeting set for Monday, February 23rd. I've been asked by the town and township to share with you tonight the reasons why a fire territory is being proposed for our community. First of all, what is a fire territory? A fire territory is a type of service consolidation with two or more taxing units, township, municipalities, or fire districts joined together to provide fire protection services. This consolidation can result in increased funding and resources for participating fire departments by spreading the cost of services over a larger tax base where everyone pays the same tax rate for the fire protection. As of 2024, there were 75 fire territories in the state. Here are some of the reasons why fire territories have been established. Number one, provide new funding sources for fire protection in communities that have limited or declining resources. Two, spread the cost of fire service over a larger tax base. Three, improve response time due to efficiency and the elimination of political response boundaries. And fourth, to improve firefighter safety by providing resources for daily minimum staffing levels. A fire territory is governed by a fire territory executive board, which is required by law. It includes at least one voting member who resides within each represents each participating unit of government, and a fire department representative non-member. Appointments are made by mutual agreement of participating units of government. Budget and fiscal responsibilities are determined by the board. So let's talk about why our community is looking at establishing a fire territory. The four main public safety protection issues being faced by our town, township, and fire department are: number one, funding and revenue shortage. Number two, aging equipment cost. Three, call volume increases. Number four, volunteer staffing needs and adequate training. Funding shortfalls. 2025 Senate passed Senate Bill 1 with unknown effects on public safety funding, but it is anticipated to reduce our funding by reducing our tax levy, causing extra circuit breaker effect, or shifting the funding to other areas within the state. This is a big concern statewide. Property tax levy history. In 1988, the township property tax levy was $6,795 per year to cover the protection and to cover fire protection in that year. It was $7,870 in 2025, an increase of only $1,075 in 37 years. So we ask the question, why? Well, in 1989, the township board reduced the property tax levy to $2,792, which was a 59% decrease in the budget adoption. Once reduced, it could not be increased back to the original amount, which was considered lost revenue. It can only increase by the annual growth factor annually, which is anywhere from 2 to 4% on average. We are sure the board at the time thought the decrease was a good idea and to help the taxpayers, not realizing the long-lasting effects this would have on fire protection revenues. 2025 fire levy comparisons. Like I stated, Clark Township, $7,870. Scott Township, $19,999. Walnut Township, $23,487. Darlington, Franklin Township Fire Territory, $108,528. We have the lowest tax levy in our county and maybe statewide. So what are our options? Since we cannot increase our township property tax levy up or on our own through the normal budget process, there is only one other available option. That is to form a fire territory and pass a fire territory property tax levy, setting a levy rate that would be the same for all town and township homeowners. Aging fire equipment. The average lifespan of fire equipment is 30 years. Currently, our brush truck is 50 years old, and the main engine is 28 years old. The cost to replace the brush truck with a used or basic model new would be approximately $350,000. Replacing our main engine with a used engine would be approximately $150,000. Replacing our tanker with a used tanker would be approximately $100,000. Equipment set to expire in the next 5 years, air packs, bottles, base pieces, SCBA compressor. This is all on an estimated, and that's with an estimated replacement cost of $260,000. All of these estimates are based upon 2025 figures. The average cost today to outfit a firefighter is over $22,000. As you can see, the cost of fire protection equipment is very expensive and definitely not fundable on our current tax levy and Cume Fire Fund levy. Call volume increases. The Ladoga Fire Department in 2025 year-end report. We just wanted to share with the community how we closed out our year in 2025. We want to thank the community for your continued support in all that we do. Without you, we wouldn't be able to operate. 2025 run stats versus 2024. Total runs were up 74% to 434. Fire and MVA related were up 44% to 79 runs. Medical related was up 82% to 354 runs. Total on-scene volunteer time was 586 hours, and that doesn't include training. This increase was felt countywide also. Call volume has tripled nationwide over the past 35 years and will only increase with growth. Volunteer staffing and training. As you can see, the number of runs is increasing tremendously. Therefore, the need to maintain enough well-trained volunteers is vital. Nationwide, 65% of firefighters are volunteers. Volunteerism is dropping nationwide, and it is harder to cover our community for all runs, especially during the day while most of our volunteers are working. Volunteers are often the first line of defense during the following incidents: fires, emergency medical, natural disasters, vehicle accident, hazardous material incidents, terrorist and active events, search and rescue. Their motto is first in, last out, always ready. Volunteer fire recruitment and retention challenges seem to be time demands, increasing training requirements, increased call volume, aging communities. To keep up with the requirements of the state volunteers participated over 40 hours a year in just training and stay up to date on their skills. We will need to look hard at what is needed for our community to retain, recruit, train, and reward our volunteers for giving up so much of their personal time to provide life-saving services to our community. Without volunteers, we do not have a fire department. In summary, township government is responsible for fire protection according to Indiana Code. The majority of fire protection funding is from a property tax levy for volunteer and full-time departments, not fundraising or grants. We have survived this long because of good fiscal management by the town, the township, and the fire department. However, we can no longer expect to keep our fire department operating on 1980s revenues with 2026 costs and the continuing increase in rents. That concludes our presentation. We'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Amy. Again, my name is Susan Cowan. I'm an accountant with Baker Tilly from Indianapolis.
Oh, man.
I broke it. Oh, I got it. I was gonna flatten it out, but I guess I won't. The process of forming a fire territory is very tightly controlled by statute. Statute clearly says these 3 public hearings must be held in order to convey information on changes to tax bills of property owners within the involved communities and how there will be changes potentially to overlapping units across the county in the areas of local income tax, circuit breaker loss, and excise taxes. There was originally a meeting scheduled last week, so we have re-advertised. The original first meeting was January 12th. Today was to have been the third meeting, but it's now the second meeting. And then the third meeting actually falls on February 9th, with, as Amy mentioned, the adoption meeting on the 23rd. So again, tonight and on the 9th, there will be a section at the end of this meeting where individuals can make comments or ask questions about the territory. There are very few ways that the state offers to provide units a way to increase tax levies, and fire service is one of the main ways. Whether it's like this as a territory or whether it is a district. Fire districts are authorized by the county and operate slightly differently, although with the same goals and the same ability to create new levy. Amy's very thoroughly covered the reasons why these two units are undertaking the territory, so I'm not going to delve into that any further. But I want to clarify, at the end of this, the territory will not be a separate new taxing unit like the township or the town is. It will be a subunit of the provider unit, and currently Clark Township will be serving as the provider unit. So what that means is across all of the assessed value, fire service will now be levied at a new rate. That revenue will come to Clark Township. There will be a fire territory advisory board that will make recommendations to the Clark Township board relative to budgets later this year during the Indiana statutory budget process. And the function, maybe the administrative function will mainly lie with Clark Township, but as I mentioned, Ladova will have representation on that fire territory advisory board. So the territory itself cannot go out and buy trucks. The territory can't take out debt. It's a subunit of the township. Either the township or the town would still be responsible for actually owning items that were purchased, even if they're purchased with territory money, or if the need ever arose to take out debt for the territory. The provider unit is not a permanent feature. There is in the statute each year, there's a period of time that the units can reevaluate. And if in 5 years, there's a different town board and a different township board and they decide they want to switch, there's a process that you can switch from each provider unit, so it's not permanent and it's not right now, but that decision is 100% how it'll be in the future. The township has to have at least 2 contiguous units to function. So if at some point in the future, one unit decides they no longer want to take part in the territory, in this case, it would be a dissolution of the territory because there's only the 2 units and there has to be at least 2 to take part in a territory. And the handout this evening is the same as the handout we had on January 12th. There's one change that I will get to, other than the dates on the cover, there's one change that I'll get to in the budget when we get there, but it's not technically a change, it's sort of a realignment. But on page 6, part of the process is we have to determine what the current rates are for fire. What are both units currently paying towards fire service? So on page 6, on the left-hand side, the red box and the blue box, that's what's currently coming in for Clark Township. They have operating receipts of $8,500. That's the property tax that Amy mentioned, plus supplemental motor vehicle taxes that every unit that receives property tax also receives. The red portion is a cumulative fire fund that the unit is allowed to accrue long-term for purchases of capital equipment. So this year, in '26, the levies set for Clark Township are $43,600. The blue box on the other side of the page are the current receipts for the town of Ladoga. Their receipts are partially property tax and partially public safety lit. So going forward, the territory will not specifically receive any type of local income tax. So Ladoga will continue to receive a share of state certified shares, as will the township. That will not go specifically to the fire territory. So the units together currently receive $106,500 in support of fire. We have to apply a tax rate to the property tax portion of those revenues. So on the next page, there's two bars, a blue bar and a teal bar. And that blue bar at the top is the portion of Ladoga's general fund that they are using to fund fire. Roughly equivalent to almost 8 cents or 73.25 cents. The total general fund rate is currently almost 78 cents. So they're using roughly 10% of their general fund levy to fund fire, again, plus the public safety levy. Clark Township, they will have replaced their current fire levy and their current equipment, their cumulative fund. So their current rate for fire service is 0.0414. Statute says they're coming with double taxation, so the two units will lose this portion of their current levy. And it will be replaced on the new rate established in the fire territory. Yeah, exactly. So the next page, page 8, is the budget. This requires that there's a slight difference from last time. It does not change at the bottom of the page where the total number says $294,500. That part does not change. It was $294,500 last time. There were just items here that were reallocated. Previously, there was more money in the personal services line and less in the other services and charges. Amy pointed out some of those items, her version of the budget she had given me and I unfortunately missed, should have been allocated down to the other services and charges rather than personal services. So that allocation doesn't change the tax rate necessary to fund fire. It just sort of changes how those expenses are planning to be used, how the revenue will be used throughout the life of the territory. So the territory levy is set based upon this first year budget. We then remove the current levies for fire, determine how much you need to support this based upon assessed values, then back into a tax rate necessary to support fire. Going forward, the levy for the fire territory will grow annually based upon what's called the max levy growth quotient. That's the amount that a levy is, it can grow each year as established by the Department of Local Government Finance. They're the state entity sort of responsible for all things property tax. Each year they determine what that we call MLGQ is, the levies can grow by that much, and that's it. So each year, the Territory Advisory Board will have to determine, based upon what their levy is, what their budget will be and what they can fund each year. So after the first year, in fact, everything here is pretty much estimates because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what the MLGQ will be next year. We don't know exactly what assessed values will be next year. We have estimates, but we don't have exact numbers. So on the next page, page 9, is where we look at the calculation for what that tax rate will be. So we have to give 3 years of information in these meetings. So the first year levy, we are estimating that it would be total property tax levy of about $322,535 because the statute says the first year the territory can accrue up to 20% additional levy or collect up to 20% additional levy for a cash reserve. Otherwise, they'd be spending pretty much exactly what they bring in and there would be nothing there for emergencies. So that first year we have calculated about 15%, which is around $44,000 of additional operating levy. Then that equipment replacement fund, the next line down, property tax capital ERF, that is a fund that, again, the territory can use for long capital purchases. Either you can use it each year to buy things or make lease payments or loan payments on vehicles, or you can accrue it long term if you want to wait and buy something outright. Later this evening, we will have a public hearing specifically on that equipment replacement fund. That's a requirement. It's technically separate. The budget that Amy turned in controls the operating levy. The equipment replacement fund is technically separate and it has some separate rules. Before we have the comment period on the equipment replacement fund, I can give a brief explanation of what those differences are and what things to consider in your questions or your comments about that public hearing. We then anticipate roughly almost $6,300 in circuit breaker loss. That's the loss associated with tax caps and the maximum limits that legislation says you can pay on your home. We have some slides further back to explain that further. So we believe that net property tax that first year, 2027, will be roughly $363,744. They then also have an additional, the vehicle excise taxes. So when individuals go to the BMV to put plates on their trucks, their cars, their boats, a portion of that money comes back and is allocated across the county. Any unit that receives property tax also receives the supplemental motor vehicle taxes. Enacting the territory does not increase the amount you have to pay for your plates. That's a completely separate function. Enacting a territory will slightly change the allocation of those funds across the county because they are allocated based upon a unit's total proportion or proportion of total levies across the county. So if the territory ends up having 6% of all the levies in Montgomery County, they would receive roughly 6% of the motor vehicle taxes and accordingly. So if they used to have between the two of them 5% and now they're 6%, that they've added, it will slightly shift amongst other units. We have a schedule that explains that later in the presentation. So for the disbursements, we're again considering the budget plus that cash accrual for the cash reserve, and then what the total amount is that can be brought in at the maximum rate on the equipment replacement fund. That's always going to be held to no more than 3 1/3 cents. Once it's established, it can't go any higher than that. So the total disbursements assumed are $388,550. Based upon the assessed value, the rate to fund the fire territory the first year is 0.2593, or almost 26 cents per every $100 of net assessed valuation in the two units in Clark Township and the town of Ladoga. The tax rate calculation is the same for the next 2 years. Although we do not levy for that cash reserve in the second year, so that drops off. That's why you see the rate go down to 0.2236 the second year, 0.2191 the third year. Some of that decrease is also due to anticipated increases in net assessed value. So if net assessed value grows more than estimated, those numbers could decline even further to support the territory. So as Amy mentioned, part of the goal of the territory is to have everyone involved paying the same tax rate in support of fire. So right now, as we saw previously, there's different rates, they're using different sources of funding. This is a way that it aligns across the territory a tax rate, the same tax rate on all properties. The next page 10 talks about debt, even though that's somewhat of a moot point. Neither unit currently has any debt. If they did, it would not be included in the territory. And as I mentioned previously, the territory itself cannot issue any sort of debt, whether it's for buildings or vehicles. It would have to be one of the provider units, but there are currently no plans to issue debt for any buildings or expansions in the future. So if we go on then to page 12, here we have a calculation of replacing the current tax rate for fire with the new tax rate for fire. So this year, we were able to get the final tax rates that were put in place at the state level after budget season. So for Clark Township, the 2026 tax rate is 1.573, or a little over $1.50 per $100 of net assessed valuation. We're replacing their current fire rate of 0.0414, then adding back in the new rate is nice. Again, we'll let them get out. Be careful.
That's bird.
Nope. Nope. It's really common during these days, people get up and leave, and we're not always in the fire truck days.
Yeah.
But it has happened before, though. Mhm.
Does. That's not a bad idea.
I don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about coming down.
Okay. There's nobody left to leave if another fire call comes in, is there? So.
We might have to.
Which they want to. Okay, so we're moving ahead on page 12. We're talking about Clark Township. Replacing their current 4 cents with the new almost 26 cents for the territory. That's a net impact of about almost 22 cents, making the new district tax rate 1.7952. That's a 13.81% increase. A district tax rate applies not only to the units that we're talking about tonight, but it encompasses and other units within the county as well. When you make a property tax payment, it doesn't go to just one unit. It goes to multiple units. So that 1.5773 there at the start, that includes Clark Township, it includes Montgomery County, it includes probably a library, it includes a school. There's other units that are included in that. So the total impact is that 13.81% increase. Then for Ladoga, their current rate is 2.4430. Again, that includes other units. It's not just the town of Ladoga. It is going to be the part of Clark Township that's not for fire. They have a portion of their levy that's for general fund services and for township assistance. It's for the town of Ladoga's tax levy. It again then has the county, school, library also involved. They're paying a little bit more currently, almost 8 cents. When you replace it with the 2.2593, it is a net impact of 0.1818. The new tax rate would be 2.6248. That's a 7.4% increase in Ladoga. The next page, page 13, shows the estimated impacts for the next 3 years. So we just talked about that first year, we're adding levy. It's going to increase the tax rate by, again, 13.8% in Clark Township, 7.4% in Ladoga. Then the next 2 years, as we account for pulling out that cash reserve of the first year and the increases to net assessed value, we would anticipate that the rates would decrease for the portion relative to fire going forward. So about a 2% decrease for Clark the second year and about 1.4% decrease for Ladoga the second year, and then a smaller change that third year. Again, if annual levy growth is different going forward, that may look slightly different. It's important to remember those numbers, that the percentages, the 13.8 to 7.4, even though we have some examples. Obviously, there are many different properties out there at many different property values. So if someone is saying, hey, my house is worth $125,000, but that's not one of the examples here, how do I do that? Well, if they take their 26, or they can use their 25 tax bill at this point, multiply the amount they paid times 1 plus the percentage relative to where they live, and that's on everybody's tax bill. On your tax bill, it tells you what district tax rate your home is in. So someplace, if you live in Clark Township, there's going to be Clark Township 007 on your tax bill. If you live in the town of Ladoga, you're going to see Ladoga Town 009. And again, if you multiply those amounts times 1 plus either the 13.8 or the 7.4, that would give those individuals a rough idea of what their bills would be because of the fire territory. So on page 15, we have a couple examples when it comes to residential homes. According to, I think it's Zillow, they told us that the average home in this area is $228,000. So we look at, first of all, what the change would be in a $150,000 home, what the change would be in a $228,000 home, then on a $300,000 home. So in Clark Township, your estimated monthly annual increase if your home's worth $150,000 is about $7.75 a month, almost $8, for an annual increase of almost $93. If you're in Ladoga, remember the percentage is a little bit less, so there you're gonna pay about an additional $6, almost $6.50 a month for about a $78 increase for the year. Then on that average home, the annual increase in Clark Township would be $164 roughly, and Ladoga, it would be about $137 for the year. A $300,000 home, the increase would be $229, almost $230 for the year, and then in Ladoga, about $191 a year. The next two pages sort of show how this change would be just relative to fire. Yes, we know that other things could change tax bills as well besides fire. But the point of the presentation is to isolate the impacts of fire. We know that the county could go out and potentially issue debt, or the library could issue debt that would affect everybody in their tax base. But we don't know about that for sure. The units probably don't even know about that for sure. That wouldn't take place till either the budget this year or next year or the following year. But right now, if we just look at the impact of the territory for the next 2 years, or for the next year, on page 16, it's for Clark Township. So we've broken down that district tax rate sort of here in a pie chart. So first of all, that big purple wedge, that's the South Montgomery Community School. Out of it, we're looking at a $228,000 home. So out of the tax bill, which is almost $1,200, $1,188 currently for 26, $725 of that goes to the school. It goes to South Montgomery Schools. Roughly 45 goes to Ladoga Public Library. Almost 366 goes to the county. There's about $21 there that goes to Clark Township for their non-fire related items. And then currently $31 in Clark Township for fire. With the territory, the bill would go from the $1,188 to $1,352. The fire part is what we're changing here, that sort of pink. You assume the other part stays the same, the pink is what gets bigger. It's a $164 change that we mentioned on the previous slide when we talked about how much tax bills would potentially change. And then the next page 17 is for Ladoga, same thing. Currently, their fire service amount is $58, but under the tax rate, the uniform tax rate, it would be $195 then in their new one. But then again, they have the same, a large portion there for the school, a portion for the town of Ladoga, a portion for the library, for the county. But the part that would change because of the fire territory rate obviously is specific to the fire territory. So that $137 again was on the previous estimates and examples for changes to a town in Ladoga. And of course, we know that not every property is a residential home property. On page 18, we have examples of other types of property. Agricultural land, agricultural or residential rentals or second homes, those are technically the same classification of property when it comes to taxation in Indiana. They're what we call 2% circuit breakers. The maximum amount of their tax bill is no more than 2% of the assessed value of the property. So if you have a $100,000 piece of agricultural land in Clark Township, the change in property tax would be roughly $206 the first year of the territory. If you have either a $200,000 residential property or a $200,000 piece of agricultural property, that change would be $412 in the township. If you look at the town of Ladoga, they have zeros. That's because since their tax rate is currently already over $2, those properties of the 2% class are at their tax caps. So there's no new revenue brought in because of the territory rate on either agricultural properties or residential rentals or assisted living facilities within the town of Ladoga. With a 3% or commercial or anything that doesn't fit into the other classifications, if you were estimating a $500,000 piece of property, that change in Clark Township would be a little over $1,000, about $1,030 a year. And within Ladoga, the change would be about $860 in the first year. So the bulk of the change is gonna come in the first year, and then there will be small shifts afterwards in the tax bill due to the fire territory. And then the other things, like I said, we have to talk about are how this impacts other units across the county. Page 21 sort of explains the circuit breaker that I've referenced already. Like I said, if you're a 1% property, that means the tax bill cannot be more than 1% of the assessed value. So if your tax bill, your home's worth $100,000, your tax bill can't be more than $1,000. So if it calculates to $1,200, the homeowner doesn't pay it, the municipal units don't collect it, that's what's called circuit breaker loss. That's where that loss comes in. So if you have a 2% property, maximum is a 2% of the assessed value, of the taxable value, not the market value, the taxable value that you see for the property on your tax bills. And then if it's a 3%, $100,000 property, their tax bill couldn't be more than $3,000 in a given year. Some levies are exempt from circuit breaker, some debt service levies, especially if they're enacted at the school level by vote, they're exempted from circuit breaker, but it still goes to other funds within the unit. So the circuit breaker's there, it just doesn't go directly to the debt payment. So on page 22, shows potential reallocation of circuit breaker due to the territory. Because in general, whenever you add levy, you also increase circuit breaker loss. Because generally adding levy requires a rate to go up, increased rates, increase circuit breaker. So we tried to give you an idea of what 2026 estimated is for this year. And then in sort of that peach column, that's what 2027 would look like without the territory. Then in the blue section next to it is 3 years estimated with the territory, 27, 28, and 29. So now 28, if you look just for example at the top line of the county from 480,000 to 1.7 million, that's not technically because of the territory, that's because of the legislation that Amy mentioned in her presentation. It's called Senate Enrolled Act 1. They're changing the structure of property tax and the structure of local income tax across the state. And in 28 is when the local income tax changes kick in. And currently, Montgomery County uses part of their local income tax to decrease circuit breaker loss across the county. The way the legislation stands right now, there will be no way to do that in 2028. So that's making circuit breaker loss go up for all units. So there will be a change associated with the territory, but the largest part of that change is going to be because of the changes from SEA 1. Page 23 is a continuation of all of the other units. You can see the school has a Crawfordsville School, South Montgomery has an increase in theirs, Crawfordsville has a much larger increase in theirs. Speaking of local income tax on page 25, under normal circumstances, had it not been for SEA 1, forming the fire territory would cause a reallocation of local income tax within the county. But because of SEA 1 and the expiration of the current local income tax structure at the end of 27, nothing about the fire territory formation will affect local income tax. Any future changes to local income tax will be because of decisions made by the county and other units within the county. If you have cities or towns larger than 3,500, they get to adopt their own local income tax rate under the current legislation, which could change between now and the time we're finished with these meetings. But as of right now, we don't believe there's any way that forming the fire territory will change the reallocate lit in any way, because everything that happens is a year in arrears. So if we're forming the fire territory to start in 27, even under normal circumstances, it wouldn't change anything till 28. But by then it's expired and we have a whole new structure at that point anyway. Page 25 explains that a little bit and how local income tax is going forward. And then pages 27 and 28 simply show current lit amounts and being basically flatlined between 26 and 27. Any change that would happen in 27 would be because of growth in adjusted gross income in the county, not because of the fire territory. And then the last page Talks about those vehicle excise taxes on page 31. And again, this is a reallocation. We are showing the same total amount each year with slight shifts and adjustments due to the increased levy for the fire territory. So you can see that it's not large shifts. If you look at the county, we expect baseline to be 726, with the territory 721,000. So that's a fairly small shift away from the county. And the same when you get into the schools, the libraries, it's a fairly small shift because there's already some excise tax for those two units. We're just adding them out with a new portion of levy that would be put in place. So that brings an end to the financial presentation. And I think the plan is to go ahead and do the public hearing for the fire territory itself. We'll then close that hearing, open up a second relative to the equipment replacement fund. I'll give a brief explanation of the equipment replacement fund with some more details, and then we'll hold a comment portion for the equipment replacement fund.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and open the public hearing for both units for the fire territory. If you are interested in speaking, please come to the podium, state your name and address at the podium. We're just asking you that to keep it to about 3 minutes per person.
It's regarding equipment, not what you just presented on.
This is on what we just presented on.
What we just presented on?
Mhm.
Big groups, 665 south, 625 east. First question would be to Amy. So the 27, so from 27 to 28, it's going from a significant increase. So is that revenues coming to the township?
Which page are you looking at? In the inclusion?
She put it down, significantly. Like, the rates were like 97.
I'll let Susan answer that.
So page 23 and page 22 are actually not income. Those are losses. Those are circuit breaker. So it's revenue that the units aren't bringing in. And because we're adding levy, you actually end up losing more money, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I understand that.
So this is a loss?
Yes.
So you're going from 97,000 to,
So like if you look
because
at,
the schools, yes, the schools are even more.
so yes, whenever there's, but like I said, between 27 and 28, the main problem in 28 is because of what's going on with local income tax and SEA 1.
Okay, so that'll probably wind up causing them to do a lift to increase taxes to bill.
Potentially, most likely they'll put a lit rate back in place, but schools aren't currently eligible to receive lit.
Right.
So other units, yes, they'll likely put something back in place for some of that.
So basically for Clark Township, it's gonna go from 6,000 to 27 to 25,000, 28. You're losing that much money.
On the territory part. So there's two lines. There's Clark Township regular, which goes from 700, 730 to 387 to 1262. So on Clark Ladoga Fire Territory, yeah, it's gonna go from 6,000 to about 25,000 to about 22,000. Over the next couple of years, that will continue to decline somewhat. It's because of the change in rate in property tax calculation and local income tax. So yeah, those are losses, not revenues.
So really, you're starting this territory, and the new tax law, it's kind of Wild West, you really.
It's, yeah, Wild West is a good way to describe it. So yeah, yippee-ki-yay.
Well, that's what it's going to. Anyway, so the other thing, on that, which, so on agricultural property, there's 13.8% increase. I did the math on that based on my personal tax bill on farm grounds in Park Township. It's just about $6 an acre. In the current farming environment, I reeled it in this year, and it was $50 an acre. So enjoying an extra $6 loss. You know, I mean, I'm not saying combine fires don't happen, and I live in the township, and I understand that we have to pay for this stuff. These guys do a lot of work, and, you know, raising the revenue, raising the rates in the house, get that? I'm doing that. Like that. The farm, I'm struggling with it.
I understand, like, all I can say is that the way that the legislation controls it, we should.
No other public comments on this section. We're gonna go ahead and close the public hearing for that. We're gonna go ahead and open the public hearing for the fire equipment replacement fund, and we'll have someone explain the difference on that.
As I mentioned, there's an operating portion and a capital portion. The capital portion is what's called a cumulative fund in Indiana legislation speak. So it's a max rate, 3 1/3 cents a year. They don't have to spend it every year, they can accrue it. Unlike the regular fire territory portion, there is a remonstrance, meaning if enough people go to the Montgomery County Auditor and file a petition of remonstrance, or basically you're in opposition to the territory, the equipment replacement fund portion, they can trigger a hearing by the Department of Local Government Finance to determine for sure whether or not the unit can be allowed to put that fund in place. So if everything's adopted on the 23rd, there will be another notice run in the paper. There's a 30-day period after that notice runs, at which point you can go to the auditor, file a petition of remonstrance. If there's over 25 of them, it all goes to the DLGF. The DLGF then determines if there's going to be another local public hearing about it.
What's that an acronym for, ma'am?
What, DLGF?
Yes.
It's the Department of Local Government Finance.
Okay, thank you.
That's the state agency that does all things property tax and
Thank you.
budget. Sure. So yeah, they would be they're the final determination,
So
so
where are they located at?
they're in Indianapolis, yeah. So even though both units have to vote by majority to establish the territory, ultimately it's the Department of Local Government Finance that gives the final approval. And they're looking for things like, are all the Ts crossed and are all the Is dotted? Were the advertisements done right? Were the meetings held appropriately? Were the votes taken correctly? Were the signatures done correctly? So those are, they do look at the dollars, but normally their comments are on other things besides the dollars. But if there is enough local petition against that equipment replacement fund portion, they would consider another hearing. There is not remonstrance on the fire territory. So don't think that if you're filing remonstrance against the equipment replacement fund, you're also filing your grievance against territory itself, because they're separate votes and separate considerations and separate processes.
And just to throw this in there, Clark Township as a township has a cumulative fire fund that's been established for years.
And that's one of the levies that will be replaced.
Right,
with
it
the
will
territory.
go away and this will replace it. So for Clark Township residents, you're already paying it. Because we are at the point 0.0333. Yeah, so Clark already has it. This would be new.
It's not available to the town of Ladoga.
Right.
It has to be the township, because townships are generally tasked with fire protection.
And for what it's worth, if the territory should fail because this group of elected officials don't vote in favor of it, the equipment replacement fund process becomes moot and just won't be implemented, right? It will only be implemented if the territory is approved.
Any public comment or questions on that? We'll go ahead and close the public comments on the fire equipment replacement fund. We have some new business that we need to handle. for this process. The town of Ladoga will be introducing the ordinance 2026-01 and 2026-02. So I'll turn that over to them.
In reference to ordinance number 2026-1, Ladoga, Indiana, February 16, 2026. An ordinance of the town council of the town of Ladoga, Montgomery County, Indiana, ordinance establishing fire protection territory equipment replacement fund. And Indiana code is 36-8-19, 8.5.
That was your first one?
That was the first one.
And that was for the
The
equipment?
equipment, yeah, replacement equipment. You ready for the second one?
Yes.
In reference to ordinance number 2026-2, Ladoga, Indiana, February 16th, same date, 2026. An ordinance of the town council of the town of Ladoga, Montgomery County, Indiana, approving an interlocal cooperation agreement for the Clark Township Ladoga Fire Protection Territory.
He's reading off the wrong dates. Is this? Would you?
Yes. The date is February 2nd,
Well,
yes.
it should be, shouldn't that date be the 23rd?
The adoption date.
Which the
The adoption date would be 2023rd.
Yes.
We need to read that
Still
again.
draft ordinances.
Just make a note in the minutes.
That those are right.
Remember in the minutes, it's actually February 23rd
So that this is.
for adoption.
First. Okay. All right.
This is one.
So I'm gonna go ahead and Elmer Gilbert is going to read and present ours for the township.
Resolution number 2026-01, Clark Township Board, February 23rd, 2026. The resolution of the Township Board of Clark Township, Montgomery County, Indiana, approving the interlocal cooperation agreement for the Clark Township with the Fire Protection Territory. Ready for number 2? Resolution number 2026-02, Clark Township Board, February 23rd, 2026, a resolution of the Township Board of Clark Township, Montgomery County, Indiana, establishing a fire protection territory equipment replacement fund, IC 36-8-19-8.5.
Everything that you needed to, okay? That completes our agenda. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Just a note, our
There it is.
next public hearing number 3, will be on Monday, February 9th at 7 p.m. here at the fire station. The adoption meeting is set for Monday, February 23rd, 7 p.m. here at the fire station. Thank you all for attending this evening.
Yes, thank all of you and thank our guests for speaking again.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Dave, you have any